story. I need to take this Torah to space with me. I need to show the world what happened to the Jewish people and how we've survived everything anyone can throw at us and thrived. And his wife said, you've got to ask him. So he went back the next day to the professor, to Professor Yosef Yoyachim, and said to him, I want to take it. I'm the son and grandson of Auschwitz survivors, and I want to show the world your Torah. It was an incredibly emotional moment, and the professor said, I never in my wildest dreams thought that billions of people would see this Torah and hear the lessons of Torah. Of course you can take it. And in addition to Ilan Ramon and the other 6 astronauts, the Torah itself also was eviscerated in the shuttle explosion. But it served its purpose. It had stood with this young boy for decades until the whole world got to see this Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name. Ilan Ramon held up the Torah for the whole world to see. I'm now going to pause and show you a brief 2-minute film. PBS, believe it or not, made a documentary on this Torah, and they called it An Article of Hope. I'm going to show you the 2-minute clip from this film, An Article of Hope, which, by the way, you can get on the PBS channel. Afterwards, you can download it. This is a 2-minute clip where you see Ilan Ramon, you see the Israeli flag proudly on his sleeve, because he wore his Judaism very proudly. You see him holding up the Torah, and most importantly, you see his beautiful smile and his message to the world. So let's pause, and we're going to switch over now to the film itself.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia. President Bush was quick to express the nation's grief. The Columbia is lost. On board was a crew of 7.
February 1st, the final day of Columbia, in a very unbelievable manner, closed another circle.
Efforts to recover debris continue.
Ilan Ramon, first Israeli to fly in space, was on board this mission.
We were told that we would be separated from our parents. We were put on the cattle train. Doors were locked. We said hello. We said goodbye. The rabbi of the people in the camp said, well, promise me that you will tell this story. What happened here? He pressed this Torah into my hands. And I looked at him and said, okay, I promise.
Tribute to Israel here, where our world famous astronaut Ilan Ramon is from.
Ilan Ramon said, I would like to ask you to give me.
Sorry.
He said, well, promise would be separated from our parents. We were put on the cattle train. Doors were locked. He said hello. He said goodbye. The rabbi of the people in the camp said, well, promise me that you will tell this story. What happened here? He pressed this Torah into my hands, and I looked at him and said, okay, I promise.
Tribute to Israel here, where our world famous astronaut Ilan Ramon is from.
Ilan Ramon said, I would like to ask you to give me this little Torah to take to space.
He told me I am the representative of all the people of Israel.
He thought he would show it to the world as a symbol of how a person can go from the depth of hell to the heights of space.
Our pride, our hope will accompany me, and it took off.
Okay. So I also wanted to show you this photograph after that film. What you see in this photograph, when we talk about symbolism, is 2 Israeli F-15 Eagles flying over Auschwitz-Birkenau on the 60th year of its liberation. And the lead pilot himself was a son of Holocaust survivors. Just imagine, in 1944, when Auschwitz was its peak killing capacity, peak killing capacity, where Hungarian Judaism was being wiped out, including my entire grandmother's family, between May, June, and July of 1944, a staggering 16,000 Hungarian Jews were being murdered day in and day out. 435,000 Jews, that's half of all the Jews living in Hungary, were murdered in 2.5 months. And the Americans had aerial photographs of Auschwitz themselves and were asked by the Jews to bomb Auschwitz. And the answer was no. Why was it no? It wasn't a strategic military target. So they flew over Auschwitz and bombed targets further inside Poland. Now, I've seen these actual aerial photographs when I was in Auschwitz, taking a march to the living group there. And the Jews basically were not a priority. Even if they would have bombed the railway tracks, they would have saved 16,000 Jews a day, but it was not a priority. One of the most controversial aspects of the entire Shoah. 60 years later, Israeli Air Force F-15s, part of the same mission that took out the Iraqi nuclear reactor, flew over Auschwitz, and their lead pilot, the son of Holocaust survivors, said, "We are here as a shield to the Jewish people to make sure that never again means never again." Now, in addition to Ilan Ramon's Torah, after the shuttle crashed, this is after the shuttle crashed, there were, no one knew exactly what the cause of the crash was. So they basically searched the debris field in Texas for months and tried to reassemble the shuttle. It only became known many, many months later that what had actually happened when the shuttle took off, a couple of heat tiles on its left wing had been knocked off by foam from the booster rocket during the launch itself. And in those heat tiles itself, the superheated atmosphere had gone inside and exploded the whole shuttle. The only comfort we have is it happened so quickly, none of the astronauts felt anything. But it took them a long time to figure that out. $1 billion space shuttle was lost because of a few missing heat tiles. And when they were searching the field, they came across a very small, scrumpled piece of paper, which looks like this. This is how it was found. And they couldn't really see anything on it except there was some kind of squiggles on it. You can see these squiggles. They thought maybe it was some kind of NASA code. They didn't know what it was. Now let's not forget, guys, this piece of paper, this crumpled piece of paper, had survived a fall of many miles, thousands of degrees of heat, an explosion, and been in the field for weeks, and yet it was still visible. And they didn't know what it was, so they sent it to NASA. Now, clearly there was a Jewish rocket scientist at NASA, and straight away he saw the squiggles were Hebrew. He said, wow, it's in Hebrew. There was only one Israeli Jewish astronaut on that flight. It must be something written by Ilan Ramon himself. So they took these pieces of paper, sent them to the Israeli forensic lab in Tel Aviv, and they managed to unfold this piece of paper. This is how it looked when it was opened, and eventually restore it to look like this. This is one of 18 pages of Ilan Ramon's handwritten diary that survived the explosion of the shuttle Columbia. 18 pages. On the very first page of his diary, he'd written the following. And I'll tell you in Hebrew, and afterwards I'll translate it to English. This is what he'd written. Yoman HaMasa, the diary of this special journey. Yom HaShishi, Vaychulu HaShemayim Va'aretz, V'chol Tzva'am, V'echal Elohim B'yom HaShvi, Mekom Melachto Asher Asa. And it was the 6th day. And God had created the heavens and the earth and all of the stars, and he rested on the 7th day. Where is that text from? Anyone who's FFP from birth, or anyone who's familiar with Jewish tradition, will know that is the words of the Friday night Kiddush. The question, of course, is why does the Ilan Ramon space diary start with the words of the Friday night Kiddush? And the answer is very simple. He didn't know them. He never said Kiddush before he went to space. And when he had a class with the Rabbi Tzvi Karnikov of Chabad Houston, he said, I want the words, the Friday night Kiddush, so I can say Kiddush in space. So I'm representing the Jewish people. And imagine being in space and saying those words. God created the heavens and the earth and all of the stars. And that's exactly what you're looking at. So this diary was mentioned in his eulogy. And in Judaism, we have a tradition. After the Shiva, the 7 days of mourning, we also have a Shloshim, a 30-day memorial ceremony. On the Shloshim of the Space Shuttle Columbia in 2003, Rabbi Tzvi Karnikov himself, Ilan Ramon's rabbi, spoke. And he spoke about the diary, and he spoke about Ilan Ramon and Ilan Ramon's mission. I want to share his words with you next. And by the way, the rabbi of your shul, Rabbi Moshe Shiner, also knows this rabbi as well. I think all the Chabad rabbis know each other. And we were discussing this last week, and he knows who he is. And his words, not only inspirational, but as you see, also contain a very high element of humor. So let's hear the eulogy now. And by the way, this is what a eulogy is about, a shiva is about, not remembering how the person died, but how they lived and what they did in their lives. So here we have 2 minutes on Ilan Ramon, the Torah, and his diary.
10, 9, 8, 7. We have a go for maintenance and start.
Discovery is not an option we choose. It is a desire written in the human heart. We find the best among us, send them forth into unmapped darkness, and pray they will return. They go in peace for all mankind, and all mankind is in their debt.
On board Space Shuttle Columbia, Israel's first astronaut, Ilan Ramon, conducted cutting-edge scientific research together with 6 other crew members. Ramon took a number of Jewish artifacts with him into orbit, including a small Torah scroll that survived Bergen-Belsen. After 16 days in orbit, Space Shuttle Columbia exploded on re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere.
Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check.
Ilan Ramon passed away in his prime, leaving a widow and 4 young children. Yet his legacy reminds us of our Jewish identity, no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing. Part of Ramon's diary was miraculously recovered amongst the debris scattered across Texas. 18 pages survived 5,000-degree heat and a 40-mile fall to Earth at minus 700 degrees. On one page, Ramon had handwritten the prayer so that he could make Kiddush on Friday night in outer space.
I'm doing it because I feel I represent all Israelis and all of the Jewish communities.
His friend and rabbi, Tzvi Karnikov, recounted.
Ilan Ramon turned to me with a question. How does one mark the Sabbath in space? With every 90 minutes, another sunset. Every 10 and a half hours is a Sabbath. Every 20 days, Rosh Hashanah. Jerusalem, we have a problem. But Ilan taught us a powerful message. No matter how fast we're going, no matter how important our work, we need to pause and think about why we're here on Earth.
So how incredible is that? Ilan Ramon, by taking that Kiddush cup to space, by saying the Kiddush on Friday night, reminded us that we can't just rush through life. We need to pause and understand what we're doing here. What is the purpose of our lives? Incredible. Everything about his story is incredible. The fact that there was 18 pages of his diary, which represents chai, or life in Judaism, is also not just a coincidence. And I'd like to thank Harriet Levine for pointing that out as well, who's a member of the community who pointed out as a private message. So let's see, we're going to talk about tragedy. The story didn't end with Ilan Ramon. Incredibly, his son, Asaf Ramon, all he wanted to do was follow his father's footsteps and be a pilot in the Air Force. And Asaf Ramon had to get his mother's permission to join the Air Force because she'd already lost her husband for the state of Israel. It was given by the mom, Rona, and he also was a cadet of honor. And on the 14th of September, 2009, Asaf Ramon's F-16 crashed in a training accident. So one family had paid the ultimate price. And it says over here, the quote in Hebrew, B'chayehem u'v'motam. This is a quote from the Bible, from the second book of Shmuel. It talks about David's eulogy for David, for his friend Jonathan and Shaul, King Saul. He said they were together in life and in death, in their life and in their deaths. And the newspaper headlines of Israel the following day were full of this tragedy. Kmo Abba, just like dad. Goral Echad, one fate. And you see the pilots, the two pilots, the same family, and both of these heroes of the Jewish people are buried next to each other in Moshav Nahalal in the north of Israel. So to conclude, I wanted to share the words of this song with you and actually play some of the music. Just before Ilan Ramon's last communication with his family, his wife and children were on the communication. And the last word they all said to him was, "I love you, Abba." And he said, "I love you, I'll see you tomorrow." So we never know what fate's going to bring. Little did they know that the next day would be such a tragic day. And the last thing that his wife Rona sent him was a song. And the song in Hebrew is called Zeme Noga. It was written by a famous poetess of the Jewish people, Rachel HaMusheret, Rachel the poetess. And this was the last message that Ilan Ramon received from his wife in the form of music. And the foreshadowing is just incredible. I'm going to translate the first verse into English, and then I'm going to put on the English screen and let you hear a bit of the music as Ilan Ramon did in his last day in this life. This is the words. Hatishma koli rechoki sheli. Listen to my voice, my distant one. Hatishma koli b'shencha. Listen to my voice wherever you are. Kol koreh ba'az, a voice calling strongly. Kol bocher b'dmi, a voice calling with tears. U'me'al hazman mitzaveh bracha, and above time commands a blessing. The universe is large, Tevel rabah b'drachim ba'arav, and his ways are many. Nifkashot ladak, we meet for a moment, nifradim la'ad, and we part forever. And she said in the penultimate line, I will wait for you until my own life is extinguished, because very soon, kvar karov hayom, the day will come, shall demot preda, of tears of separation. Little did she know that the very next day, the tears would begin in earnest. And it's incredible that this, of all the songs, is the song that she sent to him. These are the words in English, and I'm going to play you the music, if I can, hold on, if I can figure out how to do it. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to play the music in a second. I'm going to go off the screen share. So now you can see me big. I play the music. This is the
באשר הנך כל קורא בעוז כל בוחר בדמי ומעל הזמן מצווה ברכה.
All right, the last words was above time sends us a blessing. I'm just going to show the picture. Okay. This is a picture I drove Ilan Ramon. And this picture over here, I drove Ilan Ramon. And we see here the Israeli flag very proudly on his sleeve. And we also see the look as he looks to each one of us and reminds us what he has done with his life. He has lived a life full of meaning, full of purpose. And I conclude with the words that he said when he was holding the Torah. This is what he said. My mission symbolizes more than anything the ability of the Jewish people to survive anything, including horrible periods, and go from the darkest days to days of hope and faith in the future. And that's what Ilan Ramon said as he was holding that Torah. He wanted to remind the world that three things have kept the Jews Jewish. Torah Yisrael, the Torah of Israel, Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, and Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. And Ilan Ramon himself was the synthesis of all these three things as he held that Torah up. Our Torah, our people, and our land. Torah Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael. That is the secret of Jewish survival. And as incredible as it sounds, as sad as his mission ended, his mission now, if we talk about it almost 18 years later, again, that number 18, we see this is what Ilan Ramon's mission really was. To remind each and every one of us, it is not a burden to be a Jew, but it's a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Book, for this most inspiring, empowering, and uplifting presentation, which takes us back to that day. And I remember as a rabbi, I believe it was on a Shabbat when the space shuttle crashed. And I was in synagogue praying in the morning, and one of our members came in. I believe she's even on the Zoom right now, Siona Rubenstein, and told me the news. And everyone was, the Shabbat joy was just drained out of us as we heard the tragic news. But his life really is a living legacy and an inspiration for every one of us. And we see the idea of a Pintel Yid, the spark of Jewishness in the soul of every Jew, that even though he was not an observant Jew, but his connection and his sacrifice for the Jewish people and for Torah and his connection to the memory of the 6 million and the preservation of the Jewish people is just a tremendous tale of courage and nobility that could inspire all of us. And like you said, tragically, his family paid a very, very heavy price. If anyone has questions, please type them into the chat box and we'll present them. But this was truly a very moving and incredible presentation. Tuvia, let me start by asking you, how much of the 18 pages has been able to been deciphered and transmitted into writing, and where is it preserved now? Is it on display? Can you find it on the internet if you want to read more of what was written in those 18 pages? Is it on display in a museum in Israel somewhere? I know I visited the Ilan Ramon, the Ramon crater and the museum, which was very inspiring. But where could we find more of those writings, and what else was written in these 18 pages?
All right. So those 18 pages, all 18 pages have been fully preserved, opened, and they're all readable. However, some of them were deeply personal and were given to Rona Ramon and her family. Rona also, if you want to talk about the tragedy of the family, not only did Ilan Ramon die when he was 49, his son died when he was 21 in that tragic accident. Rona, a couple of years ago, passed away from cancer at the young age of 54 as well. So truly, it's a family that's been through a lot of grief. And some of the very personal pages, just messages to her and the children, she kept. the other pages, believe it or not, on the Israeli National Archives. A couple of years ago, I was in the Israel Museum guiding a group, and we had an exhibition on the most important documents of the Jewish people. And in that exhibition were the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Bar Kokhba letter, Rambam's Mishnah Torah, original copies of the Talmud, and Ilan Ramon's diary pages, which are accessible to the public. So they are accessible. You can look them up on the internet. And the general pages, he talks, for example, the Friday Night Kiddush, or about his impressions of space, are actually accessible in Israel's National Archives. You can look at their website, and you can put a search in for Ilan Ramon's diary, and it comes with a translation into English.
What are some of the other themes that are in the non-private sections that have been transcribed?
Well, there's a lot of technical notes from the diary. As an astronaut, he was a payload specialist and had a lot of responsibility. He was also carrying out experiments on Israel's mid-X, which explored global warming, but also he just talks about the wonder of space itself. Now, just an incredible thing. He knew there was danger, by the way. In fact, the family movie night, a week before the mission, was the last film you'd expect to show. It was Apollo 13. Now, the reason he showed that to his family is he wanted to be aware that there was a danger. And unfortunately, it became the reality. So he talks a lot about his impressions of space with a sense of awe and wonder. And one of the most beautiful writings in the diary, he wrote, "I can see Israel underneath my window. I can see the green. I can see the beautiful land of my home, of my people, and it just glows." That was a beautiful sentence he wrote in his diary.
Wow. Where was his family at the time of the landing? Were they waiting?
They were in Cape Canaveral in Florida, waiting for the landing.
So they actually witnessed it?
No, they didn't see that. No one saw the actual destruction because the shuttle exploded in Texas about 60 minutes before it landed. So there was a countdown clock at Cape Canaveral, and they just watched it tick to zero. No one understood why the shuttle wasn't landing.
Wow. We have a question here.
Mm-hmm.
As an educator who applied to be the first teacher in space, this is a comment. I'm constantly fascinated by developments in this program. To me, the mission holds very special meaning. Many thanks to an excellent presentation. Just a lot of congratulations. You mentioned that he was buried alongside his son in the north of Israel. Is that a military cemetery?
No, it's near his Air Force base. He served in a base called Ramat David in the north. And it's the military section of a moshav called Nahalal, which many of you might be familiar with that name. It's the moshav where Chana Senesh, another hero of the Jewish people, went to agricultural school there. It's also the moshav of Moshe Dayan as well. There's many illustrious people who were born in that, one of Israel's first moshavim from the second Aliyah period. And he's buried in the military section. And Asaf is buried alongside him of that, because that's where they lived for many, many years, in that Air Force base in the same valley, the Jezreel Valley.
I hate to be so, I know this is would any parts of his body, remains that were actually retrieved, that were put to burial?
They can identify, all the astronauts were positively identified because of the dental records. That's how they identified them. Every single astronaut was buried and identified because of the dental records.
Did he get a hero's welcome back to Israel for his funeral?
Oh, it was crazy. In Israel, as you know, according to Jewish law, you're buried usually into the ground without a coffin. The only exception, unfortunately, are soldiers, and for reasons just like this, because sometimes it's not a whole body, and they're buried in a coffin draped with Israeli flag. And Ilan Ramon very much received that hero's welcome. In fact, his wife and son Asaf were at the airport to receive the body when it came in, and it was national mourning in Israel. He was a great unifier of the Jewish people. Whatever your political views are, wherever you lived in the world, there was this tremendous sense of achdut. We felt he was one of ours. Whether you were Israeli or not Israeli, secular or religious, Ashkenazic or Sephardi, Ilan Ramon and his mission unified the Jewish people. And there was universal mourning throughout the Jewish world.
one of the questions that was just posted is, what are his surviving children doing today?
They're very, very, very much out of the media eye. And there's a reason for that, because they're just being protected. Don't forget, these 3 kids have lost their father, their mother, and their oldest brother. So the media has a very, very strong ethical reason not to go near them. So no, I can't actually answer that question. I'm happy that I can't answer that question, because they're kept out of the public light.
Do you know if they joined the IDF?
I know one of them joined, would have been of age. The other 2 are still too young to join. And I know one of the reasons the media is very quiet is because after Asaf, his son, was killed, they were outside Rona's house before she'd been officially informed by the Israeli Air Force that her son had been killed. She saw the whole media pack outside her house. And one of the idiotic journalists asked her a question: does she regret giving her son permission to go to the Air Force after he'd been killed? So people thought that was just going too far, and there's an unwritten agreement that they should stay out of the other 3 children's lives.
Has any remains of the Torah been found?
No, it was eviscerated. It's almost as if that's what it had served its purpose. It had gone through Bergen-Belsen, it sat in the possession of Professor Yosef Yoyachin for all those decades, just so the whole world could see it at that moment, as if that's what it lived for that purpose.
Were his parents alive at the time of the tragedy?
His dad was, yes. And in fact, his dad, I saw him watching it, his family name was actually originally Wolfowitz. And his mother, I mentioned, had been in Auschwitz, but his father had actually fought in the War of Independence. And he was alive. And also Ilan Ramon's brother was, they were all sitting there watching the site, waiting for the shuttle to land. His father, unfortunately, had what they call in psychology reverse order burial. You know, the sons are not supposed to be buried by their parents. The parents are supposed to bury their sons are supposed to bury their parents, not the parents their sons. So that was very tragic, but his father was still alive.
Yeah, very tragic. His wife, I believe, asked to be cremated because she wanted to have the same fate of her husband. Could you elaborate on that? And if there is a burial place for her son and her husband, why would she not have chosen to be laid to rest alongside her family?
Well, I don't know. I just want to say something about Rona. Is that after her son, her oldest son and husband were killed in service to the country, she, despite that incredible double blow, she did not withdraw from public life. She actually set up something called the Ramon Foundation to teach young Israelis about science, about her son and husband's legacy. And also there's an airport, Israel's newest airport just north of Eilat. It's called the Ilan and Asaf Ramon Airport. And she was very much in the public eye. And she spoke a lot about, I heard her speak a few times. She was a very eloquent speaker about her children, about her husband and about her son. And people knew that's what she wanted. And some rabbis tried to talk her out of it. They didn't succeed. And I don't have an answer to what was going on in her mind at the time. What I know is that she was obviously deeply emotionally affected, and that was her last wish.
Thank you so much, Dr. Book, for this most fascinating presentation, remembering such a national hero and treasure of the Jewish people, whose life and legacy lives on till today. And here's a man who is obviously a pilot, a soldier, but also a man of deep convictions, and brought his faith to the greatest heights, literally, and showed the world what it means to be a proud Jew and a proud Israeli. And like you said, that Torah is now spread all over the world, and the letters of the Torah came back down to earth, just like when the tablets were broken, the letters dispersed. And may his neshama forever be at rest, at peace with Hashem, and may his memory always serve as a blessing and an inspiration for all of us. A man and a family that gave so much for Am Yisrael, but represent the triumph life over death and light over darkness. And in particular, you know, his mission to outer space overshadows sometimes the fact that he was instrumental and, as you said, choose to be in the last plane to go attack the Iraqi, nuclear reactors and protect Israel. And could you just elaborate on the criticism that that mission received? And you mentioned that General Schwarzkopf later thanked Israel for that mission. Could you just elaborate on how much of the world criticized Israel at the time and how much did they come around later in recognition of the importance of that mission when the Iraq war broke out? And how much did that mission save Israel from God forbid, a worse fate during the Iraq war?
All right, so I'm going to finish with this question, which is an excellent question. It kind of has parallels to today, because today there's another country just to the east of Israel, beginning with an I, with 4 letters, called Iran, that's desperately trying to reach nuclear potential in order to build weapons of mass destruction. And even though Twitter will not take off the account of Iran's supreme leader, he has openly called for Israel's destruction. And Israel's doctrine, called the Begin Doctrine, named after this mission, is Israel will not stand idly by whilst it's an existential threat to its existence. So what does the world do about Iran building a nuclear reactor? They talk a lot. What does Israel do? Israel's policy is emor ma'at v'aseh harbe, as the rabbis teach us, say little but do much. Israel, just a couple of years ago, unbelievably went into Iran and stole Iran's entire nuclear library from under the noses of the Ayatollahs themselves in Tehran. Israel also uses computer technology and science to try and disrupt the program. Switching back to your question to Iraq, so Israel tried those methods as well back in the late 70s and early 80s when the good friends of Iraq, the French, were building this reactor, and they were semi-successful. They slowed down the building of that reactor. However, once the building was built, Israeli intelligence realized that in a couple of weeks it would go operational. And Saddam Hussein had mentioned numerous times that what he wanted to do, destroy Israel. And basically, by taking out this reactor, the result was everybody condemned Israel. The United Nations said, how dare Israel invade the sovereign airspace of another country? Israel's great allies, the United States government themselves, also condemned Israel. Nothing actually happened for it. And Menachem Begin, basically, if anyone's read the excellent book, The Prime Ministers, fantastic book, or Daniel Gordis's book about Menachem Begin didn't care. In fact, when the pilots were on the way and there was radio communication silence, Menachem Begin stood in his office and said Tehillim, said a book of Psalms, read from the book of Psalms, because he realized that he needed to pray for the peace and safe return of these pilots, because their mission represented the peace and future of the Jewish people. So it was an incredible mission, and despite all the condemnation, we don't really care, because we have to look after our own. Because if you rely on the pity of our host nations, the result, as we saw just over 70 years ago, was 1/3 of the Jewish people being murdered. What it means to have a Jewish state is to be in charge of our own destiny. And one other thing that Ilan Ramon taught us, you should never say, well, I'm just one person, what can I do? Because you're one person, you can do something. So here, Ilan Ramon is an individual who literally changed the course of Jewish history. And I'd like to finish your question with one other quote from the rabbis from Pirkei Avot. Sometimes it seems like the missions are just too much. And our rabbis teach us, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. We can't finish this work, but we can't say, let someone else do it. Because everyone said, let someone else do it, nothing would ever get done. And even though Ilan Ramon was presented with Mission Impossible, he thought of a way to do it. And despite the world condemnation, Israel is now safe for the Jewish people because of this mission.
Thank you very much, Dr. Book, for your wonderful presentation. And it's really a pleasure getting to know you via Zoom, and we hope we will be able to learn from you in the future. Again, I want to thank Harriet Levine and Mark Levine for introducing us to you. And we look forward to continuing our friendship and relationship and continue to go out throughout the world and spread your teachings and Jewish pride. So thank you everyone for joining tonight, and Laila Tov and Toda Rabah.
Thank you very much. I'd be happy. Thank you for hosting me, and it'd be a pleasure to join you guys again. Thank you very much to your wonderful school and your wonderful congregation.
Thank you everyone. Have a wonderful night. Laila Tov.
Bye.
Bye.